I started learning JavaScript around 10 years ago when I was working with jQuery, and I was able to use the jQuery in many of my front-end web pages. And I was doing a lot of DOM manipulation, but that was direct DOM manipulation. Um, then came AngularJS. We started migrating to AngularJS and we started using it. AngularJS introduced the concept of a shadow DOM and how they would update the DOM on real time. Then came React.js, where they introduced the concept of virtual DOM, and they had an algorithm called reconciliation algorithm that was responsible for keeping the real DOM updated with what's in the virtual DOM, but at the same time keeping it efficient and optimized. Now I've been using all these libraries since many years, but it is important to also understand the internals and the architecture of these algorithms so you can understand them better. So I started to just try out some code to create very basic version of a virtual DOM and a reconciliation algorithm to create a very simple and very typical to-do list application. So let's dive deep into it. Right, to get started, we will start with creating a class for the virtual DOM, very basic class. So let's just create, by the way, this is just an empty wheat JavaScript project. So there's nothing happening here. So it's just an HTML file. I have created an empty to-do list.js that we will just populate shortly. But let's first start with creating a class for creating a virtual DOM. So we will just export class. Let's call it vnode. Let's start writing the constructor for the virtual node. So what we will need is, first of all, we need a tag. So which element or which HTML tag is this node going to represent? So that node tag, whether it's a div or it's a UL or it's an H1, so that tag representation is needed. Then we need what are the props that node is going to take. Now for this virtual DOM, for this very simple implementation, it could be the standard props that HTML elements take, like the style or ID or class. Then we will be providing another parameter as a constructor, which will be the children of that node. So again, that node is going to be can also have children, and the children will be again of the type node. So that will create a tree structure within our virtual node class. So let's start creating the constructor here. So constructor will have tag, will have props, children. Right, so now what we need to do is we need to initialize those. So tags will be tags, props, the past props, like a very standard constructor. And we will also store the DOM node reference as well, just in case we need it to update or perform any operations directly on the DOM node. Right. So we've defined our constructor. Now we are going to define a very basic version of a render function for this virtual node. So the idea is we are going to use this render function whenever we are going to populate or repopulate whatever is going to happen in our operations. So let's start writing our render function here. So first of all, we'll define the element. The element will be based on whatever the tag is provided. So if it's a div, it will create an element of div. If it's an h1, that will be created. Then we need to loop through if there are any props. So then we will loop through all those props and we will add those to the element. Right. Now we're going to loop through all of the children, if any, and if there are children, then we will again see if they are of type string, because if it's an end node, then we would want to add the text node here as a child. And in case if it's not a string, then we will need to append a child, but we will again call the render function again so that we can go deep into the tree with each children. Until then we reach an end node, which would be a text node. So that's how we've created a render function, and we will also assign the DOM node as well. And then we will return the element here. Right, so I think we are ready to use the node. So our virtual DOM very basic class is ready to be used. So let's move to our next step. Now the next step would be to have a very simplified reconcile algorithm or function in our case. The whole purpose of that reconcile is whenever there is a re-render, it's going to update the real DOM with the changes that are in the virtual DOM. But in our case, we'll keep it very simple, so it will just replace the real DOM with the virtual DOM instead of an optimized or more efficient code, because we are just trying here to understand how it works, not trying to optimize or create a full-fledged reconciliation algorithm. So let's create file, and in here let's start to, so we'll create the reconcile function. It will take a parent node, an old node, and the new node. Next up we will see if there is no old node. In that case, all it will have to do is we'll just append the parent node, new node into the parent node. Now we will use the render function of the node every time we are going to use the node. That way that node will be, the whole tree of that node will be rendered on the real DOM. Else we will just take the new node and we will replace the parent node with the new node. Right, so this is a very simple reconcile function that we will use. Now our virtual DOM is ready, our reconcile function is ready. Now we are going to populate our todo.js to create a very simple to-do form and application. So let's go into that. Right, so we'll open the to-do file, and we will start with importing both the vnode and the reconcile library or files here. Right, then we'll just define a root vnode as null, and also we'll define an empty to-dos array here. And now we need to define a very simple render function for our to-do list as well. So we'll just create a render function here. It will take a new node and it will add the new node to our root element, but it will also, we will also use our reconcile function here. The whole purpose of the reconcile function is to whatever is in the virtual DOM, it will add it to the real DOM. Right, so I think our render function is ready. So let's move into the next function to create the to-do list. Right, so to create the to-do list, let's first create a function. So we'll create a function to do list, and it will return the new node. It will be ul. Let's pass the props as well in this case. So we are passing id, and we will loop through the to-dos list, and we will just add li as each new node. So this will be our virtual DOM node for the to-do list application or to-do list. And now we need to define another function to add individual items to the to-do list. So let's just let's just suppose we have an input element in the HTML. It's called new to do, and we are getting the input. We will just trim that input value and store it into a variable. So if there is a new to do added, we'll push it into the array, and then we will set the value of the input as empty, and we will create the to-do list, and finally we'll render the to-do list using the render function we created above. Right, so we've created a to-do list, and we have been able to create a function to add a to-do list item as well. So the final thing which is left is to initialize our to-do list. So let's just do that. So initial to-do list would be called create to-do list, and we will then again render here as well. Right, so I think our to-do list component in our case is also ready. So let's go to our main HTML, and here what we need to add is we need to add an input and a button here. So let's just add those as well. So let's add those two here. Let's first add the input. We needed to call it new to do because we are getting the value from, and we are going to add the button here as well. Let me just quickly get the button here as well, and we are using the add to do from our to-do.js. Actually, we will need to add it to the window, because in JavaScript we cannot access module functions outside of the module. Right, so I think we have created what was required. So let's quickly start our project. We'll just quickly do npm install, npm run dev, and it's running. So we'll quickly get this running. So we have to-do list with virtual DOM. Let's go back here, review everything which is working fine. And to do as well. So let's get back here, let's add something. Right, so we are able to add items to the to-do as correctly. So you can see here our virtual DOM is also working fine. Our reconcile function is also working fine. We are able to add items to the list here as well. As you can see, it's working fine with the click of the button as well. Now we have created these functions, and we are able to use this to create this to-do list. Just to show you the power of these two functions, although they are very simplified versions here without any logic or any optimization added, but you will see the power here. We've created the to-do list. Now let's quickly start to create a counter component as well. So we will use the same to v node and the reconcile function for the counter as well. So let's create a counter.js file here, and let me quickly get the counter code here. So again, I'll show you, we are using the virtual DOM and the reconcile function. We have created a very basic render function for it, which is just using a div and which is adding the count as a string to the node. And we have an increment function which increases the count, and we have a decrement function which reduces the count, and it just calls the same render function. As you can see, it's a very simple counter component that we've created using just JavaScript and our two main reconcile function and the virtual DOM class. Let's also create an HTML for this as well. Let's quickly grab that as well. And you can see here again, very simple file. We have two buttons, one for increment, one for decrement, and we again have the root and the counter module added here as well. So now if we go back here and let's just see if the counter is working fine as well. As you can see, counter is also updating our real DOM using the reconciliation function, and we can decrement as well. So you've seen we have been able to use our reconcile function and our virtual DOM object to create these two practical applications, although very simplified examples, but our code has been also simple. So the idea was to show you the power of these concepts. So it is important to understand these concepts. Even though we are not going to be using them directly, we have these available in most of the JavaScript libraries that we use. So it is important to learn these concepts and understand them better, so that while we are using these libraries, we understand their internals and we can then use them to their full potential. So I hope you liked the video. Thank you. See you in the next video.